Hi, my name's Mark, and today I'm going to unpack everything that I knit or crocheted in 2023. Let's get started. Alright, let's talk about everything I made in 2023. I'll start by giving you a peek at my notebook where I keep track of all of my project notes. I don't keep the perfect track record, but it's a pretty good skeleton of what I'm working on, and I like that I can keep the date listed alongside the right column, and I assign all of these projects specific ranges of pages in this notebook. The pages are numbered, so that way I have about 4 pages for each project, and the type of notes I keep have to do mostly with changes I make to the pattern. I always make sure to write down things like the needle size I end up using. I don't always keep track of how much yarn I actually use, but I write down things like the color, the fiber, and if I adapted the pattern at all. So, this is a good place for me to keep track of things. It's also a good reminder of what I've made and generally when those things were made in the bigger timeline. So I dubbed 2023 the year of sweaters. I only had 2 hand-knit sweaters that I'd ever made for myself, and in the cold months, I would find myself cycling between these 2 sweaters constantly. That meant my outfit choices were really limited, and it also meant that I was going to wear down those 2 hand knits much faster because they were getting so much use. So I decided 2023 would be my year to make myself several sweaters that I could add to my wardrobe and have ready for fall, for winter, and even for spring. So I started off by making Andrea Mowry's Weekender. This is a really popular pattern. I had seen lots of fellow knitters wearing it. I'd seen it online, and it was my second Andrea Mowry pattern that I've knit. The first project I worked was her shift or night shift, whichever one of those two is the cowl version. And so I wanted to experience the Weekender. I made this sweater out of Malabrigo Rios, a worsted weight yarn, superwash wool, and the color is Siri, and I really like how it ended up pooling. I think this is a decently flattering sweater for me. I get a lot of compliments on it when I wear it. I don't love that it's a boat neck. I find that a little hard to wear. I often am pulling the sweater one way or the other to get it to lay flat or to center my shirt, my collared shirt underneath. But overall, it's pretty comfortable, pretty easy to wear. It has a split hem, so you can see the longer hem in the back, shorter in the front. And out of Rios, it's a really soft sweater. It feels almost like sweatshirt material. It's got a lot of nice drape to it. And I love the faux seam in the front and the back. I think it's a pretty design. And I really like that it's made inside out, so I'm spending the majority of the sweater knitting because I don't love to purl. I can purl with the best of them, but it's not my preferred way to spend time on a project. So that's the first sweater of 2023, The Weekender by Andrea Mowry. Next up is the Oksa from Caitlin Hunter of Boylan Knitworks. This sweater is also a worsted weight sweater, and I chose to do this out of a non-superwash wool stock from Blue Sky Fibers. I've said on the channel before that wool stock is my favorite yarn. That's still true today. I really love their range of colors. I feel like a lot of the colors are somewhat earthy. The colors also work well together if you're looking to do color work projects. And this color is Wild Thyme, Thyme, and I think it's a really beautiful shade. It's a little challenging to show it on camera, but in person, I think the definition shows really well. It's a little easier to see from this front camera. but it's a nice textured yoke sweater, top down. And this was one of my favorite things to knit in 2023. I think that I might end up knitting this again, perhaps out of another color of wool stock. I think it behaves really nicely out of a non-superwash, and it was really fun, really engaging to knit. Something about this sweater that I really loved, and I've actually borrowed for several other sweaters since, is the technique Caitlin Hunter uses for the cast on, the first couple of rows, and then she mirrors it in the bind off. I think it's really cool. She sets off your start of ribbing and your finish of ribbing with a couple of rows of stockinette. And what that does is it curls your cast on or bind off edge up. And I think it's really cool. I don't know if you're able to see that decently in the clips I'm showing, but I liked that detail and I've used it in several other sweaters since. Following the first two sweaters of 2023, I felt a really strong desire to make sweater vests. I have never really worn vests or sweater vests in my life, so I wasn't sure if these would look decent at all on me or if I would enjoy wearing them. But I don't know. I don't know if it was the temptation of not having sleeves to knit or if I just felt like I would like to pair sweater vests with button-down shirts I like. Also, the idea of having sweater vests that are lighter, that breathe more because it's not a full sweater. So I think all of these things attracted me to the idea of making a few knit sweater vests. All of that to say, we're starting our sweater vests with Ghosts in the Orchard by Thea Coleman of Baby Cocktails. This is another worsted weight sweater vest pattern, and I chose to do this again out of wool stock. So this is the second wool stock color I'm showing you today, and this is Gray Harbor. It's a nice sort of silvery gray, very light in color. I think if I were to do this again, I would probably go a shade darker, maybe a charcoal gray or a more earthy neutral, just because I feel like on me, this silver gray stands out in a bad way. I'm a pretty big guy, and so when I'm choosing the colors of my clothing, typically I try to do things that have some sort of subtlety to them and make me feel confident, make me feel like I look good. So I feel the same way when I'm making something. I really try to choose a color that's going to balance my natural coloring, look flattering on me, and go with a lot of the other garments that I already own in my wardrobe. This pattern was really enjoyable to work. I love cables, and I thought this cable pattern was nice. Kind of angular. I like the masculinity to the pattern, and the only thing I don't like about this is the V-neck. I love the look of a V-neck, but I found that on me, I think a V-neck looks crazy, and I probably won't do any more in the future. The next vest of 2023 is this cranberry number, this time with a rounded crew neck, and this pattern comes from Petite Knit. I always forget if it's Petite Knit or Petite Knits, but either way I'm putting it up on the screen. And this is out of a worsted weight yarn. I did this out of wool stock again, but the pattern called for fingering weight held double. Fingering weight held double results in worsted weight, so I wasn't sure if the designer specifically had a reason for calling for the two strands of fingering. Obviously, it would make a different texture because, excuse me, each strand of yarn would really be made up of two strands of fingering weight. Either way, I tested this pattern. I tested the swatch first out of the fingering weight version of wool stock, which is wool stock light, and I just didn't love the texture. It didn't have the same drape that I could get from worsted weight, so I abandoned ship and I decided to work this pattern out of one strand of worsted weight wool. I actually haven't blocked this yet, so part of me says this is not a finished object. I also haven't woven in my ends. You might see them sticking out a little bit. I was a little bit over the vests by the time I finished this project, so I haven't worn it yet. I don't have any issues with the pattern. I think it was straightforward, enjoyable to work. I like the textured knit, the combination of knits and purls resulting in this chevron or zigzag, and I'll probably enjoy wearing this next season. But for whatever reason, I was over the vests and I didn't feel the urge to debut this garment in 2023. I forgot to say about the previous vest that was wool stock in color cranberry compote. So this next vest, as I said, I was really on a vest kick. This was, I think, my favorite knit of 2023, and I lost it. I don't know where in the world this vest is. If you find it, please let me know. I would love to wear it again. This is the Ingrid Slipover from Petite Knit, and she also makes this pattern in a full sweater. The sleeves on the sweater version are just as textured as the body, and I didn't love the look of that, especially for me being a larger man, but I loved this as a slipover. I worked this out of wool stock in the color Gravel Road, and I felt like this was really flattering. I loved that the shoulder was slightly dropped, slightly drapey. There are really beautiful eyelets on the sweater vest. I love the combination of textures in the different panels. I would knit this again. I'm going to have to knit it again because I lost mine. I'm super bummed about the whole situation. I'm glad it was a fun knit because I'm going to knit it again. And I think I'll probably recreate it in the exact same color, and maybe I'll make a second in something a little darker. So anyway, that's the Ingrid Slipover from Petite Knit. My favorite knit of 2023 that I don't even have to show you. Next up in 2023 is my Cosmo Sweater from Simone Ryan. I think this is a really cool pattern. I don't remember how I found this pattern. I know that when I was knitting it, it was newly released, so it might have just been that I had scrolled through all sorts of sweaters in a certain weight on Ravelry and stumbled upon it. It's a little creased from being haphazardly folded up in the drawer, but I think it's a cool pattern. It's got a broken rib up top and then a cabled row, a cabled sort of seam coming in towards the center, and then underneath the cabled seam is all stockinette stitch. So I made this out of a fingering weight held with a lace weight mohair. So together, I think the fingering plus the lace weight resulted in like a DK weight yarn. The fingering yarn I used is from Kelbourne Woolens. It's perennial in the color ultramarine. And the lace weight mohair I used is from the company Ito Yarn, and the fiber is called Sensei. I think it was called New Blue, but anyway, it's whatever their sort of ultramarine blue is. And my colors matched well. It results in a really, really lofty fiber, super squishy, super lightweight, and really soft. So that's the general sense of this sweater. It was not a quick knit because the stitches with the light fingering weight plus lace were pretty small. And I also found myself splitting the mohair off from the fingering weight pretty often, so I'd have to go back and redo a stitch and make sure I was catching both strands throughout. I don't know that I would make this again simply because it's a lighter weight sweater than I normally knit, but I'm really happy with the result, and I've worn this a lot. So that's the Cosmo Sweater. Next up in this sweater parade is my Painting Bricks sweater from Stephen West. This was my first Stephen West project. Another very famous pattern. I'd seen this sweater all over the internet. I'd seen a few in person, and I'd also seen the Painting Shawls book that I think was published or at least showed up in my local shops around the time that I was knitting this sweater. So I wanted to experience the pattern. I wanted to make something from Stephen West, and I really wanted an excuse to use a wild combination of colors and have something a little bit more loud in my wardrobe. So I knit this out of fingering weight yarn. The pattern calls for DK weight, and I don't know what possessed me to do it out of fingering weight, but I don't know. I think I imagined the sweater would be lighter and I could wear it more often. It would still have been decently light out of DK weight, and it also would have gone faster because my stitches would have been bigger. But alas, I made it out of fingering weight yarn. I used Sweet Georgia Tough Love Sock, which is a really beautiful superwash merino with nylon, and I've worn this sweater a ton. It's a sort of statement piece. I was generally happy with the pattern. I have a few frustrations with it that I talk about in its own video, so I'll link that above. Next up, I have one of my favorite sweaters from 2023. This might get second or third place overall. Maybe fourth. I can't remember how many sweaters I've already given slots to. So this is the Lighthouse Keeper by Lindsay Fowler, and it's currently featured in her book Salt and Timber. I think this was a recent release in the last year, maybe 2 years, so the pattern might only be available through the book right now, or perhaps it's launched on Ravelry as its own purchase. So this sweater was worked out of a worsted weight yarn held with a mohair. I used wool stock in Gray Harbor as my sort of silver base, and then I held with that, I have to read it because it's such a long name, a mohair called Rico Design Essentials Super Kid Print. So this yarn is from the company Rico Designs, and it's a striping mohair. So the color shift I get in this sweater is simply the result of the mohair I used. The color I used was summer, but I actually saw a colleague knit this out of another base color, neutral of wool stock, with a different striping mohair, and the result was really beautiful. So I'm just carrying two yarns throughout. The color changes are happening on their own. The only tricky thing is that I wanted the sleeve color changes to line up with the body, so I had to measure that out, snip the colors, and change them manually so that they would match the striping of the body. This was a really quick knit. The stitches are pretty enormous, and I think I did this in a week. It's almost like a sweatshirt in its structure, so it's really easy to pull over whatever else you're wearing, and super comfortable. The yarns together are very lofty, squishy, warm, fuzzy, cozy, and I'm really happy with this project. The only qualm I had was the size of the neck opening. As I mentioned before, I'm a larger man, so I'm often making sort of a 2x size from the pattern, and sometimes that results in the neck opening being enormous. And even though my body is bigger, my neck opening and my head aren't that much bigger than a smaller size would be. So if I were to make this again, I think I would cast on with fewer stitches and then increase until I reach the appropriate amount of stitches for my size. The next sweater of this never-ending line of sweaters is Vesper with a Twist by Thea Coleman of Baby Cocktails. I had this sweater in my Ravelry favorites for several months, and I was very happy with the process of making this. In fact, sometimes I think I might make this again using a different yarn or a different color. So I worked this project out of Rowan Felted Tweed, which is a DK weight non-superwash wool. The pattern calls for DK, but I would say that Rowan felted tweed is a light DK. It almost feels like sport as you knit it. So I feel a bit like this sweater ends up being sheer. It looks flush to the eye. It's very lightweight, very easy to wear. I think I could wear it in 3 out of 4 seasons of the year. But it's maybe slightly sheer for my taste. So I don't know if you can pick that up on camera at all. But if I were to make this again, I think I would make it out of a truer DK weight. I'm really happy with the cables. Interestingly, the back side of the sweater is done in stockinette stitch, which I appreciate. I think that's a nice sort of shortcut. The sweater looks simple from the back. From the front, you have beautiful, intricate cables, and then the sleeves are also in stockinette stitch. And I really love the folded collar, the cowl-style collar. It's the first time I've done a sweater with that sort of neck, and I love the result. Super cozy, while still being lightweight, very wearable. So that's Vesper with a Twist by Thea Coleman. Okay, this next sweater is not knit, it's crochet, and I think this sweater gets my least favorite vote of 2023, unfortunately. This is the Faraway Jumper by Iron Lamb, and this goes to the bottom of my list for a few reasons. One is the pattern itself. I made this with one of my best friends, Megan, and we both found that the structure and sizing did not add up. So, for example, after working the increases at the yoke and the appropriate length, both by measurement and following row count, the sweater was nowhere near being able to close at the underarms. So we both had to add several inches of more fabric before we could actually separate off the sleeves. It's fine, especially since I make a lot of sweaters. I could figure that out. I could work around it. But if somebody were making this and they don't often veer off from the pattern instructions or experiment with any changes, then their sweater would be really ill-fitting and it would be a big frustration. So a little bit of issue with some of the instructions. And then the other issues come from my own decisions. I made this out of a yarn called Remix Light. And Remix is from Barocco Yarns. It's an interesting fiber. It's made up of lots of things. I think cotton, linen, viscose, all sorts of like plant fiber and some synthetic fibers. And I just don't love the feel of it for a sweater. There's very little give. Not a lot happens when you block the sweater. And I just find the whole thing to be kind of heavy for what it is. I made it because I wanted to crochet a sweater. I wanted to play around with granny stitch. And I think the design of it is cute. I like the colors I have. It feels very autumnal. And I'll probably wear it once or twice a year in October. So overall, as a result of the pattern itself and then my choice of fiber content, this is not high on my list. It's not something that I think of fondly or something I would make again, but that's okay. As crafters, we have a lot of trial and error. A lot of things are left up to choice and chance. So not everything we make is going to be something we love, and that's okay. I think that's why we craft all the time. We craft for our whole lifetimes, and you end up having things that you really love and cherish, and then some other things maybe you put to the side, or maybe you abandon partway and you repurpose your materials for other projects. The next sweater is one of my top favorites of 2023. This is the Field Sweater by Camilla Vad. This was another hugely popular pattern. This pattern was featured on the homepage of Ravelry for several months, I think in summer, late summer, sometime around then. And it's such a beautiful pattern. I also think that the colors I've used here look great with this texture. So almost all of my colors are chosen by one of my best friends, Megan. She is fabulous with color, and I really doubt my ability to choose colors for myself. So she almost always selects or at least advises me on my colors. So for this sweater, I used a DK weight Scout from Kelborn Woolens, and that's in the color Driftwood Heather. And I held with it a lace weight mohair, again from Ito Yarns Sensei. I forget the name of the shade, but it's one of the greens. It's sort of a forest green. And so the lace weight mohair is held with the wool at the top for the yoke portion, and then I had so much of it left over that I decided to use it again at the cuffs and the hem. All of that's up to you if you make the pattern, but I think at least using mohair for the yoke is a really beautiful addition. I think this pattern is gorgeous. I really enjoy wearing the finished sweater. I like the feel of a top-down yoke sweater. I know some people don't like that shape on their bodies, but for me, I think it's flattering. I think it's really comfortable and very easy to wear, easy to move around in, and very comfortable. I enjoyed making this sweater. I did make another version. I started the cardigan version, and I used an alpaca for that. So it's one of my works in progress that I'm going to show in a later video. But I would do this again. It's a little bit complicated working the increases along with the cables and creation of these bobbles or grain stitches. But if you feel that you are an intermediate level knitter or further in your journey, I think this is a great sweater to make. And I think if you make it, it's probably going to be one of the most beautiful things in your wardrobe as well. So that's the Field Sweater by Camilla Vad. And to round out 2023, my final sweater of the year is the Maja Cardigan from Helene Magnusson. This is a free pattern on Ravelry, and when I first saw that, I was a little nervous to follow through and make the pattern, because sometimes a free pattern means that it hasn't been thoroughly tested, and there might be errors waiting within. But I can happily report that for the size I made, there were no errors, nothing funny with the math, everything added up perfectly as it should, and it was a very straightforward process to make this garment. This was my first steeked cardigan, meaning that I made the pattern in the round, and then at the end, cut right up this front center and reinforced the cut edge before picking up my button band. I chose to do a needle felted steek, so I used a needle felting tool with lots of barbed needles, and I stabbed over and over again until the cut edge was totally felted together before picking up my button band. And for the buttons on this sweater, I chose to use the winter set from Ikigai Fibers. I think they're really cute. It's a mixed pack of different stars, geometric star buttons, and then a fir tree. So I thought they worked pretty well with the colors I used, and if I change my mind later, I'll snip them off and maybe use a sort of regular run-of-the-mill wood button. I made this sweater out of DK weight yarn. I used Scout from Kelborn Woolens in a number of colors, and the pattern actually calls for Aran weight yarn. So the reason I decided to use DK weight is because I liked the color palette better in Scout than the color palette I was considering in comparable Aran weight yarn. It also meant that the cost of the sweater would be lower because I got a lot more yardage from the DK weight yarn than I would have from a comparable Aran weight. I worked my swatch and I made sure that I liked the texture of the fabric on the needle size I was using before figuring out what measurement would work best for the finished object and then deciding which size I should make. I'm really, really happy with the outcome of this sweater, and it's something that I've worn a whole lot already. I think that I'll wear this for many years to come, and I would potentially make this again using a different yarn or a different combination of colors, and I would definitely recommend it. So if you like color work and you want to do a color work cardigan, I'd recommend the Maja. All right, moving out of Sweaterland, I have just a few wraps that I made in 2023. The first is the Gresham Wrap. I have a video where I talk more about this. I made this as a wedding gift for my husband, and I made this out of woolstock worsted using several different shades. And this pattern is written for woolstock, and I think it works really beautifully on a non-superwash. I also think that these colors specifically look gorgeous together. Each band of color represents a different textured knit, and the wrap is symmetrical on both ends with the color work and textures. I think this is a beautiful project. It's a nice statement piece, and the finished object is pretty big, and it's a nice cozy wrap. You can wear it as a sort of blanket scarf. You can wear it truly as a shawl. I think the uses are flexible, and you can see a bit of the wrong side here. Nothing terribly wrong with it. You just don't get the exact textures that you're going for, but it's somewhat reversible. Not completely. The pattern does not show on both sides, but if it flips around, it doesn't look bad. Some things look really lousy from the wrong side, so it's nice when you have a wrap or a scarf that still works out if it's being blown around in the wind, etc. So that's the Gresham Wrap, and it's made out of woolstock from Blue Sky Fibers. All right, the next project is a crocheted wrap. This is the Contour Shawl by Joanne Scrace, and I enjoyed making this project quite a bit. I don't love to crochet. I say that I like to crochet. And I'm sure you can tell from the balance of crocheted projects to knit projects from my 2023 roundup, I don't spend a lot of my time crocheting. However, it's something I enjoy doing, and it's something I like to learn more about. So every once in a while, I really feel the urge to spend my time with a crochet hook, balancing out a little bit of my knitting. So I made this out of a sock yarn. I used Sweet Georgia Tough Love sock in a really pretty variegated green, and I think it works well for this wrap. The shape of this is nice. In the pattern, the designer says that the best thing about this is that it's shaped like a tick, which I think is really funny because nobody really likes to think of ticks in a positive way, so I guess it is great that it's shaped like a tick. I don't really know why she opens with that line, but it's memorable if nothing else. So I like the pattern. I'm not a crochet aficionado, so I don't want to say too much about it because I'll probably say the wrong things, but I think it's a nice wrap. I don't wear wraps, so I haven't worn this yet, but I'll probably give it to someone. And continuing with crochet, I have a kerchief. This is the Skyward Kerchief by Tony Lipsy, and I like Tony's patterns a lot. I recently got to meet Tony at a knitting and crocheting retreat here in Ohio, and I think she's a fabulous teacher, really inventive with her patterns, and most everything she designs, I think, is pretty friendly to beginners or advanced beginners, which is a nice way to operate. So this is the Skyward Kerchief. It's made with a sock weight yarn held with a mohair. Again, I used Sweet Georgia Tough Love sock. The sock yarn I used is mostly brown and rusty, and then the mohair is this blue. So the resulting color I think is interesting. It doesn't necessarily look amazing on camera, but in real life, in the sunlight, I think this is a really interesting shawl or kerchief. And I also like the myriad of ways to wear it. I'm a big fan of the kerchief over a shawl or wrap. So I do wear the Skyward Kerchief pretty often. The final wrap of 2023 is called Intermission, and this is by Deanne Ramsey. This is another crocheted wrap. I felt really strongly about crocheting last summer, so I made the Skyward Kerchief, I made the contour wrap and Intermission back to back to back, and I was specifically trying to use up a lot of my fingering weight stash. And this shawl was a great way to do that. It calls for several colors. You can either use mini skeins or portions of full skeins, and I never have mini skeins on hand, so I just broke into full skeins that I wanted to use for this. And it's really customizable depending on the colors you use. Some of the example pictures on Ravelry show people using gradients, which I think have a beautiful result. Again, I didn't exactly have a gradient or any mini skeins on hand, so I just went with a random assortment that I thought would complement each other. I think this is a really pretty wrap. I like this one. I like the shape of it. It's cozy, almost like having a blanket with you. And I like how bright and sunny it is. Overall, this was fun to make and a fun project to have with me during the summer. Alright, we're going to close out 2023 with hats and a couple of Christmas stockings. So starting with the hats, I knit 3 hats in 2023. This first is from Brooklyn Tweed. It's called the Woven Roots Hat. And I did use Brooklyn Tweed yarn for this. It was my first time using Brooklyn Tweed, a really earthy yarn, sort of thick and thin, which isn't always my favorite, but I think it's a beautiful result. A little tricky to work with, in my opinion. Also, this hat calls for worsted weight, but I ended up using their fingering weight yarn. I used the same needle it called for. I got the gauge. None of that should make sense, but it's what happened. I think because the yarn was so thick and thin, so earthy, it just filled in the gaps, and the fingering weight ended up doing the same thing a worsted would have. So, interesting scenario. I think it's a beautiful hat. Next up, I have 2 of the same hat pattern. This is the March hat from Kelborn Woolens. They did a year of hats where they offered 12 free hat patterns, one for each month of the year. I think they did that in 2021 or 2022, something like that. So you can find those patterns online. This pattern features a seersucker stitch. So it's just a combination of knits and purls that end up with these diamonds. I'm not sure if you can see those. I think it's a pretty pattern. It's also a very cushy, comfortable texture. So the first hat, the more earth tone version, I made out of Tina's Twisted Fibers. Tina is a local hand dyer to me in northeastern Ohio. And then the second hat is made from Malabrigo Rios in the color Medusa. The first version I made, Tina's Twisted, I did a twisted rib, which is always my preferred rib. I just think it looks nice. The second hat, I did a traditional 1x1 rib, which is what the pattern calls for. So, quick knits. Nice that if you're a quick knitter, you can knit a hat in an afternoon. Good gifts, fun personality. I like to make hats in bright, lively colors because then the rest of your wardrobe can be conservative, but the hat can be your pop of color. And now the cherry on top of my 2023 project roundup are my Christmas stockings. These stocking patterns come from Darlene Swaim, and they're called Into the Woods. She has a few or several variations of the pattern. This first Into the Woods has a cottage, and then Ned's stocking here has a truck with a fir tree in the back. So each pattern has a variation on the main picture, and I think she also includes variations on the holly I have, but I chose to keep the holly and the snowflakes consistent on each stocking, just because I preferred that. You'll also see that I have a little bit of sequin yarn running through these. The sequins are used sparingly so that they look like glittering snowfall. I really like these. I think color work is fun. I love the traditional look of these. They have a simple I-cord for the hanger. And I used Germantown, the worsted weight Germantown from Kelborn Woolens, to make these. It's a really sturdy yarn, which is nice for something like this because then the stockings themselves are very firm, very sturdy, and they block out really well. So those are my Christmas stockings. Thanks so much for watching today's video and for sticking around until the end. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the projects that I worked on in 2023, and I'd love to hear from you certain things that you made and projects that you loved. Let me know in the comments below things that you recommend, things you enjoyed making, and connect with me on Instagram or Facebook where I can actually see what you're working on. If it's your first time here, I'd really appreciate you taking the time to subscribe for future videos. Leaving comments or likes always helps me here on YouTube. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with me. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.